today, my friends, we are honored. I'm honored to me, a big celebrity. When I was graduating high school, you had become Miss America 2000. This is Heather French Henry. And Heather, you also, one of the things I love about you is you and your husband run and own the Rosemary Clooney Museum here in Augusta, Kentucky. And you are a huge, huge proponent for veterans. So I thought it was just an amazing opportunity to ask you, from someone who came from a town of like 1,000 people, how you became Miss America. And, what do you think? I mean, one of the things I kind of wondered is, do you think you got maybe a leg up being from a small town for something like that?
Well, you've wrapped a lot of questions into the intro. So first and foremost, just wanting to say, it's great to be from Kentucky. I'm the only Miss Kentucky to become Miss America. So I have a huge legacy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I'm still heavily involved in the Miss Kentucky organization and the Miss America organization, which is awesome, and all of its history. But being from a small town is actually not unique to Miss Americas. We actually have lots of Miss Americas that come from middle America. When you think of America, as I've traveled as Miss America, it's not just made of large cities. You find that even in large cities that it's packed full of small communities. Now, I will say Augusta, being 1,400 people, if you count the cats and the dogs, is pretty small. So I spent the first half of my life here in Augusta, then the next half in Maysville, which is really why we are involved in the Rosemary Clooney House Museum. And so when you think about these two small towns right on the river, it just has a special ambiance and atmosphere. And we do call ourselves river rats. When you're raised on the river, you just can't get away from the river. Thus, I now live in Louisville, Kentucky, on the Ohio River, no doubt. But it offers just a wonderful childhood. Everyone's close. You know each other. My great-grandfather, 7 generations ago, founded Augusta in 1796.
Wow.
So my entire history has really been here.
Well, one of the things I was kind of wondering is, my school, when I graduated, was 400 students. So roughly probably half of those were girls. And you think, most girls, or a lot of times when girls are young, they're comparing themselves to so many. And I wonder if maybe your self-esteem, or maybe you didn't have some of the issues because you didn't have as many people to compare yourself to, or was that ever even an issue for you?
Well, I don't know. 17 magazine, I think, offered a lot of girls my age and Generation X something to compare yourself to. But I grew up watching Miss America. No doubt. I remember my Miss America. We each have one that we watched that really resonated with us.
Yeah.
And Debbie Turner, Miss America 1990, who now I get to call my forever sister.
Awesome.
Is that Miss America for me. They're all really special. We're a close, even dysfunctional sisterhood at times, certainly, but we're all pretty close. We share a unique experience that most people outside of the pageant industry don't understand. But Debbie, to me, when I saw her win, she was the epitome of what I always thought a Miss America should be. And so that really encouraged me as I had been competing in small town rural America, especially here in Kentucky. Every teenage girl grows up either cheerleading, being on stage of some sort, musical theater, playing sports, but pageants, like county fair pageants. Every summer, you would do a handful, and now they've even expanded to statewide pageants where now you have a state winner for county fairs. But when I was growing up, you did Little Miss, you did Junior Miss. This was nothing like Toddlers and Tiaras. Couldn't be further from that. It was literally in a horse ring at the county fair on a plywood stage. It had been left out all year long, certainly. And so I just began doing those as a child, just as an extra sport. But it was just a small part of what I did, certainly. But as I grew and I had watched Debbie win, it just encouraged me to utilize all of the talents that I had, plus caring for the community. My dad's a disabled Vietnam veteran who had co-occurring issues with substance abuse and PTSD. So I knew that Miss America was making a difference because the platform started with Debbie Turner. And I knew that it had expanded its role to not just being that, Americana girl sort of dream, but it also was a real job. And it also paid for all of my college education, which was phenomenal. And that started my trek really for Miss America. I did compete in Ohio first because I was at University of Cincinnati, and then I came back to Kentucky. So in total, it took me 5 years of competing at a state level in order to win to get to Miss America, because you can only compete at the Miss America level one time.
Oh,
That's
wow.
And it was in my last year of eligibility, which is crazy. I was 24 at the time, and this was it. And it was interesting. People ask me all the time, what was it like in that last year? Did something change? And I did. Like any person who strives to be the thing, you always think, oh, I've got to be this way or I've got to be that way. So there's a mold, whether you're in acting or something, there's always people you look up to. And finally, at 24, I was a graduate student. I was teaching fashion illustration at University of Cincinnati. I was an art director at the EPA.
You had a lot going on.
I did have a lot going on. But I finally sort of knew who Heather was. I had cut my hair really super short. I just said, you know what? I'm fine if the judges love me, but I'm also fine if the judges don't love me. And one of the judges said afterwards, the authenticity. It was, we knew that you didn't need the crown to be someone, but we knew with the crown you could do extraordinary things. And that was also replicated at Miss America as well. So I finally sort of let go of the stress of being the thing in order for the thing to
That's amazing.
happen.
Did you foresee yourself to, how people say, oh, I could see my, did you see that moment?
When I was 4 years old, I actually had a dream that I was Miss America.
That's great.
And at a church homecoming hymn sing, because I grew up singing Southern gospel music, a girl leaned over to me and she said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, well, I'm going to be Miss America. And she was like, what? Not, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be this. It was, I'm going to be Miss America. I just didn't know that it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And I think that core belief that if I work hard enough, I can achieve it is still sort of my foundation today. I mean, we're standing here in the Rosemary Clooney house thinking, why and how did this get started? It's like, well, because I had a friendship with Rosemary. And when she passed away, we bought the house thinking it was going to be a second home like it was for Rosemary. She was the second phone call I received after winning Miss America. She became a mentor to me. And then one thing led to the next. I'm like, well, of course we can create a museum.
Well, and with what your degree is in, that lends a big hand to costumes.
Exactly. Having a Bachelor of Science and a Master's in Design, especially focusing on fashion, the curating of these collections is something that's second nature to me. My mom grew up sewing for movie companies that would come into Kentucky. She's an incredible seamstress, which the entire collection started with that red dress.
That's what I heard.
Which is the only reproduction piece in the entire collection. But she made that for me for a show. And then a month later, we buy the house, we contact Paramount, and then one thing just led to the next. And so when you think about the artistry of these costumes, Edith Head, arguably one of the most important costume designers in Hollywood history. You think about the craftsmanship in each one of these costumes, but also the journey of these costumes. For me, it is that investigative process to find, where did they go?
Yeah.
Because over 3 decades, all the studios,
they could be anywhere.
They sold off tons of their costume collection to make room because they were still making movies at the studio lots. And if you've been to any of those studios, there's not a lot of room.
Yeah, well, and what we found out with, like I was telling you, my friend Todd Fisher, for years Debbie Reynolds tried to do her museum. And one of the things that she found out was a lot of people in Hollywood didn't think that the tangible, like costumes and things, anybody would ever care about. And so they just discarded a lot of things. And it's sad.
They just didn't understand the monetization, right? Whereas now collectors, you look at Heritage Auctions, Bonham's Auctions, Julian's Auction, which I think is who sold Debbie Reynolds' collections. You now think, when you see those astronomical prices, Steve McQueen, Marilyn Monroe, millions of dollars. And what we have to do is constantly peruse the catalogs. Every time an auction comes up, I get a notification and I go through the entire lot.
And things have been replicated to no end at this point as well.
Thankfully, what we have found through the White Christmas collection, because we have a book coming out, we've been able to get into the archives at Paramount, so we know what costumes, when there were doubles made and when there was just one.
That's great.
And then when there are doubles made, trying to figure out what's the hero costume. So the hero costume is the one that finally makes the film. But like Arlene Dahl, we have an Arlene Dahl costume from Here Come the Girls. And we know that there were 2 of those made. One is in a collection in Hollywood, and then we've got one as well.
Yeah.
She does an extraordinary dance, Spanish dance, where she's doing lots of leg lifts and
could have been damaged and they wanted to.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you think about, gosh, they probably needed 2 just in case something happened.
Yeah.
We have a costume from Vera Ellen, who, when she's in the Mandy scene, if you're a white Christmas nut, you know the Mandy scene, she's doing all the rolls and acrobats going down the steps and doing the splits. So there are 2 of those, and one is in Hollywood and there's one here. So to me, it's really that investigative process into getting the costumes back together. Why did they travel to Switzerland? Why is there one in Australia? And you're just like, we got to get the family back together.
And it gives you a long task of something to do. You'll never run out, I'm sure.
No, and it's amazing to me where we find these costumes. People will come to us through Facebook Messenger. It's nothing to get a text or an email just on any given day from somebody in Arizona that will say, hey, I think I've got one of the dancer costumes from the Mandy scene.
I can't even tell you the crazy stories I've heard.
That's exactly right.
Honestly.
But you do have to then go through the process of authenticating these,
yeah.
right? So all the studios had their own tags, and Paramount's no different. So it has a fabric tag that says Paramount Studios. It's vintage, it's hand-threaded, and they will have written the names of the actors or actresses.
Yes.
The only time we've seen something scratched out in a new name were 3 of the chorus girls from the Mandy scene. Those were used in an Elvis Presley movie called Roustabout. And
I love that movie. It's one of my favorites, actually.
Right. So now for us, it's like, ooh, maybe that can be a branch off collection if we find something.
Absolutely.
And you think of people like Vera Ellen, George Shakiris. They and Rosemary were all from like Norwood, Ohio. Rosemary finished high school in Cincinnati. So it's like, we can start collecting more things of Vera's. We can start collecting more things of George Shakiris's, because it just adds to. And if we're not preserving it, maybe they're just going to be stuck in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah, like you were mentioning to me, you're kind of on the early side of some Miss America traveling exhibits. Can I ask you, one of the things that I've there's 2 questions I just dying to ask you.
Go for it.
What is day 1 of Miss America like, and month 1? Where do they start you? And because you were Miss America 2000, it was the transition of like the internet becoming a thing. So I was wondering also how much that played into what you were doing, promoting things.
I did have a MySpace page.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I think that Facebook may or may not have been a thing. I'm trying to think of all
Friendster, I know all those.
like that. But I know that I was emailing a ton, so that had already become common communication, and I had a cell phone, so it wasn't like I was without that. But it was interesting. After I won, I was the Millennium Miss America. So in those days, they would set you on your media tour immediately. And every 18 to 24 hours, you were in a different city and state for the rest of your year. And you got home during your homecoming, you got home during Christmas, and usually Easter, if you asked. And then my sister got married in the summer. We also had the Kentucky Derby. So I did some appearances back here in Kentucky, but by and large, I was on the road.
It's a huge commitment. People don't know.
Huge commitment. One of my favorite media moments, though. So as soon as I did my Atlantic City sort of romp in the ocean, which we used to do, they whisked me away to New York City. I had media training by 2 media moguls who I totally did not appreciate in those days, David Horowitz and Richard Valeriani, who trained presidents.
Yeah.
They sat me down in my hotel suite. I was terrified. I was exhausted. I was probably the last contestant who hadn't cried her eyes out because she was so exhausted. And they just raked me over the coals because they were getting me ready for an entire press tour.
Yeah.
And we were also going through some controversial issues at Miss America, which never seems unending when you think about pageant history, but we were transitioning CEOs, and so they knew I was going to be hit with maybe some opinionated questions.
Oh.
And so they were grilling me, but they were showing me tapes where they grilled presidents. And these are tapes that probably will never be seen. And it was just an interesting insight. Now, as someone who does media training, I think about being in that spot and just understanding how well prepared the organization, especially in those days, were really helping you build a foundation to be ready. So then the very next day, I did a huge press conference in New York City. I was on Good Morning America with Diane Sawyer. And then that night I did David Letterman.
Wow.
Who, like, to me was the epitome of classy dressing. I love his suits. I even said it in one of my press conferences that I love David Letterman. So he brought out flowers to me. He called me at the hotel and asked me to sing. Literally.
Oh, that's so cool.
Ran through to my hotel and said, Heather, I would love for you to sing on my show. And I was like, David. I called him David. I said, I don't know. I've only been practicing my talent song. And he said, well, can you sing anything else? So I sang A Foggy Day in honor of Rosemary, who had just called me previously. And I went on his show, sang it. He was amazingly kind. He's from Indiana.
Yeah, I was say he's a small town guy,
and he's been here to Augusta before. I think he and George are probably close friends. So that was one of the highlights as I started off my year to have that. And he also sent me a note to the hotel, and I still have to this day, handwritten, that said, "Don't let those punks get you down." Because it was all about, the press.
I can see him saying that.
So I've kept that note, and that has just resonated with me from my time in government and politics. And I always think, David Letterman said, don't let those punks get you down.
Well, that seems like an extreme schedule, but in a way, I kind of love that they make so much out of the position that they really do so much with it. Now, how much did you, because I know you were near and dear to veterans and veterans causes, how much did you get to interject that into what you were doing, or did they already have kind of a set agenda for things they wanted to promote? Or
no, your platform in those days, which is now called your CSI, your Community Service Initiative, was the entirety of your year. So your whole scope of work centered around that. And then there were some other things, like I did the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade that we actually had to sort of fight to be in. I had to actually make the phone call with the organization, because that is negotiated new every year.
Oh.
Right. So when you see Miss America in, it's because you've had a meeting, had a phone call, those sorts of things.
That just seems like an obvious one,
no, because, the networks have their own stars that they want a position to be in. So you kind of have to negotiate. So I had to do that. But there were things like Children's Miracle Network. We had built-in obligations to them and some other things. But by and large, every day, multiple times a day, I was doing appearances for and focused on veterans initiatives, whether it was VA hospital visits. I actually started getting into legislative policy during that year with the Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs.
Yeah, you've had quite a career, I read.
I never knew that I would love working in and with government so much, which is why 25 years later I still do a lot of that work. But from the moment that a non-veteran, fashion designing Miss America, child of a veteran, got involved, it just seemed the right path. And it's a unique voice, because
it is.
We hear from veterans, we hear from spouses, but hearing from children of veterans and understanding that military service has a ripple effect. That
big time.
That sort of opened up a dialogue that had not really been set center stage.
Yeah.
And so I think that combining the glitz of Miss America and all that brought, combining that real world experience of being the child of a Vietnam veteran with my knowledge and education, and being able to expose what wasn't happening, it really set us on a trajectory where, like, 25 years later, we are still feeling the effects of the legislation we put forth 25 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
not many people can say that. I mean, that's the beauty, I guess, of making a difference in the way that you have. I mean, that's incredible, especially with the schedule you kept. I would just think it would be hard to not feel run down, or
there were days.
Yeah.
Anytime you have an intense year, it's just like a political race. And now that I've run my own, I certainly understand that. Every day is a day that chews down that small time frame that you have. So there's always an end date. So with Miss America, you only have one current year to be Miss America. Mm-hmm. Now you can continue, like I have, to do things for 25 years, and you can always use that platform of Miss America. but you will never be the current again. So you have literally that tour of service, whether it's, Abby this year, it may only be 6 months because Miss America is going to be in September, so she'll get a shorter duration. But I serve 13 months, so a month longer than the normal year. So about 6 months in, you start understanding that you only have a short amount of time to
and then it's running out.
And then it's running out. And so I always, try to educate our current and new Miss Americas. You have 1 year. You are going to be so tired. You're going to do the countdown at some point. But you need to think about how you want to make the impact this year, because how well you do this year will then determine what you do after in the next year. So it's hard to think about it when you're in the thing.
Yeah.
But if there was one thing I could impart to each young lady who gets the crown, it's that.
So at the end of your first 48 hours, did you think to yourself, can I do that? Yeah. I mean, you have to be wondering,
Yeah, and it was really great that Stephen, who's now my husband, he was the sitting lieutenant governor. He's a little older than I am, but it was wonderful to have him and to have Rosemary. Like I said, she was the second phone call I received.
Yeah.
First with Stephen. So it was great to have Stephen and Rosemary there to help bring me back to center. They both had such wisdom in how to handle the press and how to handle that exhaustion.
That's so good.
And they both encouraged me that, hey, you know what? It's just today. Just worry about today. And there were even moments where I had to get to, okay, just the next hour, Heather. You can handle this appearance, and then at some point that will end. You'll come back to the hotel. You'll get to rest, or you're going to be flying, and you'll get some rest there. So I began to compartmentalize those moments, and that really helped. And it helps now. I mean, I'm a mom. I've got 2 daughters, 21 and 23. I do a host of other projects, and I still carry on some of those methods. But really, Stephen and Rosemary taught me those.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, like, as someone the town I was from is called Troy, Ohio. And growing up, the only famous person that ever came to our town was Kimberly Aiken. And it was just such, I remember our town was just, it was such a big deal. And I think, she's probably done a million towns. She's probably, but every town, there was somebody like me out in the crowd that's going, wow, like, you can do anything. When you see somebody like that, you know that the world's a big place, and that it's only as small as you let it be. So it's so cool to see everything that you did. What was your favorite moment, or other than becoming Miss America, what was the favorite part of that year?
Wow, there's so many varieties of things that you get to do as Miss America. So whether it was going to a homeless veteran facility in jeans and a t-shirt because I didn't want to show up in a gown, a crown, and a limo, or going to the White House for meetings. But there was one particular moment on Veterans Day. So on Veterans Day in Washington, D.C., I got to be the keynote speaker at the Vietnam Wall, which was an extraordinary moment for me, for my dad, which was great. And then right after that, we got to go to Arlington Cemetery with the President, and the Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of Veterans Affairs. What was interesting is before we went up to the crowd, underneath the amphitheater at Arlington, there's a holding room. And myself, Secretary Cohen, Secretary Togo West, and President Bill Clinton, all 4 of us were in this holding room for an hour. So I, as this 24-year-old newbie Miss America, standing there, and they're all asking me questions about my platform, what I want to do. And I was there with 3 of the most powerful men in the world
that could help make things happen.
And so they were all taking notes. I was talking about homeless veterans reintegration programs. I was talking about VA healthcare, what my experience was with my dad. And I'll never forget, once we get back up to the amphitheater, and my family and I were sitting over at the side, President Clinton is speaking, and he literally, unscripted, which he always did so beautifully, right? Mm-hmm. Like, acknowledges me, has me stand, and acknowledges the work that I'm beginning to do on homeless veterans.
Wow.
And it was just, that was the
elevating
firestorm.
Elevating you to a platform beyond Miss America fans.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
So it brought together just that passion, that work, and it really set the stage for all the legislative work we were able to get done that year and beyond. So that was probably one of the most pivotal moments for the year.
Okay. Now, you said that you served for 13 months. So tell me about month 13. Were you looking forward to it ending, be honest? Or were you going to miss it? I mean, that's got to be a lot of attention. Some people love it, some people hate it.
Well, certainly you're exhausted as you grow closer. Now,
And
for
probably
me,
don't have much of a social life during that time. I
oh,
can't
no,
imagine at
no,
all.
there's no social life. Now, Stephen would come visit me on the road because he had the availability to do so. So, you know.
But like hanging out with friends, going and seeing a movie, it's like, how do you get to do that ever?
Well, you just have to resign to the fact that that's all going to have to be for afterwards. You only have the 1 year. So by the time your year's coming to an end, for me, all the veteran service organizations were having their national meetings. So I ended the year on this uptick of appearances.
Wow.
So there were days where I was doing a breakfast in one town, at a layover doing a luncheon, and then winding up on the West Coast doing something in the evening. So we were trying to cram it all in.
Sounds like it.
And so I was counting down the days. Now, there's a reason I was really counting down the days other than I was exhausted. I also was getting married 14 days after my year ended. So I was trying to pseudo plan a wedding, although Stephen did an extraordinary amount of that. It was a big to-do. It was televised here. My wedding gown and his tux are now on display at the Fraser History Museum for their Love and Marriage exhibit. And that in and of itself was a huge ordeal. So I was going from one platform to the next.
Yeah, Miss America to Second Lady of Kentucky, right? I mean,
and so I went straight into a very similar role to a degree where I had, you had security, you had an office, you had, so I wasn't that Miss America that then went down and had to go back to college. I was finishing my master's, but I went from here to maybe right here.
Yeah.
But I was still doing like appearances and all the things.
Yeah, and you've pretty much, from
Never
what I can
stopped.
understand, you've never stopped. You have, as you said, this house. You guys run the museum. Do you want to tell some of your other accomplishments? I mean, I know that you've had some pretty amazing jobs here in Kentucky.
Well, probably much to my daughter's chagrin, we have a few legacy projects that we would love for them to even continue. So above and beyond the Rosemary Clooney House Museum, which we want to expand, we also have the Future Fund Land Endowment, which has 6,500 acres of conservation space in Oldham, Jefferson, and Bullitt counties, and that is to save Floyd's Fork, which is a stream that runs through those three counties. And there's a Parklands Park that's been built along there, and so we partner with them to give them land. But our job is conservation, and so 6,500 acres we want to see grow to about 10,000. We feel like would complete that project, but that was 97 different farm purchases to keep from high density development being built in that area. That means barns, houses, everything all that came with, upkeeping that, renting that out. So some strategic planning for that. And then we also have my Veterans Foundation. Of course, I do military public education displays, which is one of my favorite things. I do a large 10,000 square foot one at the Kentucky State Fair.
That's
so
awesome.
Every year, that is a huge, I don't want to say challenge, but it's always a challenge for me. I want it to be not only honoring the veterans, but I want it to be educational for young and old alike. So I create immersive experiences. I'm a huge Disney fan.
I love that.
So I think about like when we did World War I, we had 3,000 sandbags. We had trenches that they could walk through with ambient sounds.
Yeah,
I
love
really
that.
capture that imagination. And then we also have the Kentucky Prostate Cancer Coalition. My husband is a prostate cancer survivor. And so we want to make sure that we are funding free screenings for men throughout the state of Kentucky. And we're giving families educational information to take back to their own doctors. We understand that men, sometimes they just don't take care of themselves as well as women do, certainly.
Yeah,
and
guilty.
we always say, if you're in Kentucky around the state fair time, you can come and get a digital rectal examination and funnel cake in about 5 minutes. So we do have several wonderful family projects that we want to continue on for generations.
And if people want to meet you, sometimes when they come to the Rosemary Clooney house, they might have you as their guide, right?
They might. We always have several festivals throughout the summer that we religiously show up for. Art in the Garden, which is always the first Saturday in June. We come here with our docents because it's a large crowd And I usually camp in the Hollywood room where you'll see red garters, Here Come the Girls, the stars are singing. So I talk a lot about her house history as well, here and in Beverly Hills. And then even my parents sometimes will come and stand in a room because we just want to make sure that people have that human experience when they come to Rosemary's. You can certainly walk around and read all the information, but it's always great to hear the history, certainly firsthand.
Sure is. Thank you so much for your time today. I just love everything you're doing, and I can't wait to see what you do in the future.
Thank you. So what you're seeing here is my official crown box, and in it I keep several mementos. So a Vietnam Service Medal and a lapel Purple Heart, which were given to me by 2 different veterans. One, of course, served multiple tours in Vietnam. The lapel Purple Heart came from a young veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, has hundreds of pieces of shrapnel in his body, and so he gave that to me to keep in my crown box. And then I'm also here holding my official Miss America crown. I received 2, but I was the Millennium Miss America, so I got the 14 karat gold and ruby crown, which has Swarovski crystal. They also did give me a silver traditional Miss America crown, and that one now is on display at the Fraser History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, along with one of my Miss America gowns. So I wound up with 2 crowns, which is really great.
That is cool.
Yeah, and then behind me, this is an album that a lot of Miss Americas get gifted throughout their years, but ironically, it is a Miss America Presents, and Rosemary Clooney is the very first song with the song Tenderly, which she was famous for singing. So I really think that this makes it even a closer tie for me with Rosemary and having the house. And then also Rosemary's sister-in-law, Nina, was a former Miss Lexington. She was runner-up at Miss Kentucky, and that's how she and Nick met. So one of my preliminary titles was Miss Lexington, so we're Miss Lexington sisters.
That's amazing.
I grew up with Nina here in the town doing all of her things, and so it's just like having this museum, building not only Rosemary's collection, but the Miss America collection and also Miss Kentucky collection. It sort of like is tying a bow around it all. Right?
Yeah.
It all comes full circle. So this crown has made many things happen and kind of still is.
All right, my friends, that is what it is like to be Miss America. Hope you enjoyed our day with Heather French Henry. We will see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.